If your workforce is shrinking and there's fewer people who are actually able to be consumers, those consumers can't buy the products that you wanted the AI to be built around. So if you have smartphones that are $2,000 a piece and you want to sell more smartphones, and those smartphones make it easier for people to not have jobs because you can have AI do the jobs, fewer people can actually afford smartphones. The company that created the AI tool that made it easier to produce smartphones has now just hurt themselves in the long run.
Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Revenue Architects. This podcast is tailored for revenue leaders navigating the evolving landscape of sales, RevOps, and revenue management. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Evan Matza, Senior Director of Revenue Operations at Flock Safety, the leading public safety platform designed to help communities prevent and reduce crime, not just respond to it. Evan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into revenue operations.
Yeah, it's a little bit by accident. I've been in and around technology sales for the last 30 years. I spent some of my earlier years in sales roles, business development roles, and pre-sales and engineering roles. Around 2002, we decided to have a family, and I needed a career that didn't have me traveling 70% of the time. I was working for EMC. We were doing a number of go-to-market initiatives, and so I volunteered to be a part of some internal project work that led me to the channel and then ultimately into sales operations and later revenue operations. So here I am.
Excellent. We like to start off most of our conversations around forecasting because that's always something every RevOps has to deal with. And I know you have some unique points about this. The bigger a company gets, the more it wants to measure everything, which is directly opposed to what you actually want salespeople doing.
100%.
So when a selling environment shifts, like for example, pipeline stopped in Q2 last year, how do you know which metrics in the drumbeat still apply and which ones do you want to swap out?
I think your overall sentiment about is where people fall mostly. At the end of the day, there are metrics that matter, is what I call them. Whether it's 5 or 10 or what have you, there are things that are really meaningful, and those things move the needle, regardless of whether you're in a growth period or a contraction period. If you don't focus on those things well, then the rest of these are window dressing in a lot of ways.
Sure.
And so there is a tendency, like you're saying, where people would, if you had an off quarter, quickly run to another set of metrics to try and diagnose the problem. And ultimately, it usually comes down to, are we not creating enough pipeline at a fast enough rate? Are we not converting it? And what are the causes of those things? It tends to be that people will focus, you'll see a drop off in pipeline creation, or you'll see changes in pipeline conversion for one reason or another. You can pull up all sorts of other data to help you inform like where are the problems occurring and all those other things. But at the end of the day, those are the big elements. So I think the hard part is having the discipline to focus on those things that matter and always go back to those things that matter and not get sidetracked with other things that may be hot or in the moment that may lead you down an incorrect path, if that makes sense.
And so how do you get to 3 to 5? Like every RevOps person, it's so easy to scope creep into all these things to measure.
Sure.
What was it about your experience that led you to, we got to get this down and stay there? You mentioned something about ruthless simplicity in the way that
yeah, there's some of that. I think there's some of that. And I think there's something around understanding what people can actually focus in and do something with. The big issue isn't measuring the thing. It's getting sales focused on working on improving the thing, what the thing is. So if you're too busy trying to create new vectors or understand new angles or whatever, people don't do well digesting 10, 20 different metrics that they have to go try and improve on. They do well with 3 to 5 things or one thing that I can go improve on in this particular moment. And so it is ruthless in some ways where you have to be laser focused on the things that will actually move the needle and denoise some of these other things. And sometimes, having worked at a large company and now at a smaller startup company, that's tricky even from the C-suite all the way down. There's always an interest in measuring something else or looking at some other vector that may be interesting, but doesn't actually move the needle with respect to the health of the business, like the 90% of the business that matters. I'll give you an example. Flock is getting into the drone business. We've been in the drone business arguably for a better part of a year. We have a major drone release coming shortly. We acquired a company a little over a year and a half ago that we quickly turned everybody over to. Just everyone got excited because drones are cool. So then there were all these metrics around how do we measure drone sales and drone pipeline and drone effectiveness. And ultimately, I think we sold a handful of them, but the business at the time wasn't a drone business. The business at the time was based off of our core product line, which was a set of cameras and long range video. And so it's if you over rotate towards drones, then you take your eye off the ball on the core business and you wind up ultimately having maybe a bad quarter because you were too focused on the shiny new thing as opposed to the thing that makes you the most amount of money.
Got it. Excellent. I like it. Ruthless.
Yeah, there's a Boston Consulting Group framework where there's the cash cow model and you focus on the cash cow. And then you don't necessarily always, people get distracted by the new entrants or the new technology, but ultimately the cash cow is what you have. And that's what drives the business. But there's also, obviously, you have to focus on the future in order to maintain your innovative competitive edge. But ultimately, if you don't focus on the things that drive the business at the moment, then you're going to potentially miss and have a bigger problem than you thought.
Steven, I wanted to ask you this new thing that is getting formed up, right? It has been a couple of years now where people are really getting into talking about entire revenue management. And in our last conversation, you mentioned these are the live conversations right now going on, right?
Sure.
Within your organization. So my question really is, and you also talked about EMC-Dell friction, saying that how do you use a PC-led selling motion to apply across. So my real question is, in your experience, what would you call a real friction points, and how do you really align, or in your opinion, what is a complete revenue management team should look like?
Yeah. I don't think we're that far off in
Mhm.
terms of what exists today in the world. What is different is what I would call the seams, like focusing on the seams. Thinking of it this way, there's general consensus around like sales would own new business creation. If you have a customer success organization, they would own maybe renewals. But if you think about the best in tech, there's the best worlds where you have a renewal business that leads to net new business or expansion as a result of that inflection point occurring in the renewal, and then figuring out the model around how you would drive net new business or expansion opportunities through that 90 to 180 to almost a year in advance. That middle ground where it starts to glue net new or expansion business together with the renewal is what I'll call a seam, right? And where you have the clear line of ownership on new business and sales and the clear line of ownership of renewals on CS, if you're not gluing those two together, you're going to have things fall through the seams. So you're more likely than not going to find yourself doing renewal on time at best. And it's going to be less revenue capture than what you could get otherwise. If you could think about a renewal cycle a year in advance and had the wherewithal to say, how am I going to convert this into a much larger expansion play or a co-termination or consolidation play, you have the opportunity to drive significantly more revenue at arguably a lower cost to serve because you're doing it well in advance as opposed to under emergency pressure. And then you're forced into a pricing issue or you're dealing with competitive pressure, et cetera. So when I think about this end-to-end revenue management piece, there's two components. One is like, how do you make sure that there's no gaps? That's part one, maybe three components. The second one is don't just look from sales to success. The entire end-to-end revenue architecture starts with marketing and runs all the way through support. So if you don't have end-to-end, all those teams working on the same sets of things with the same sets of priorities, you wind up with a little bit of thrashing where people are independently working on things that they care about, but are less about the integrated revenue cycle. So I'd say having an end-to-end view is critical. And then the third component would be,
As you're mentioning, trying to get the revenue management across all these streams and making sure everybody's pulling together, what does it take? There's this both the strategic viewpoint of it, there's the technical who's doing what, but then how do you get everybody to break down and untangle the roles and drive more collaboration? in a way that actually helps people deal with the pressures of increased quotas and really trying to maintain margin controls.
Not just within RevOps, but across the entire revenue organization, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
I think of it a little bit in terms of culture that you build, where let's just take the RevOps function. The RevOps function exists in service of the revenue business, right? Our job is to make reps and success leaders, et cetera, work more productively, be able to achieve quota faster. So if we're doing our jobs right, that's how a lot of this stuff should flesh out. And the things that we look at in order to remove burdens from these teams should be everything from forecasting, for example, like how do you make that a lighter lift? How do you infer more information from all the various data sources that you have available? If you're doing outbounding on Gong or SalesLoft, how you infer information from that conversational intelligence. So you remove burden that way. How do you use lighter processes or change policies in your quoting model so that you remove some of the burden and operational friction that comes along with some of those things? So I think the big part is in this cultural element where it's less about us versus them and more about one integrated model. Another way to think about this is, and that sounds maybe naive or fancy, but if you think about the advent of AI and tooling, for example, there's all this activity going on with, let's say, RevOps organizations trying to create new tools, new tech stack elements. And at the same time, sales is experimenting on their own and creating things that work really well for them. So instead of it being like RevOps creates the tools and then shoves it down sales' throat, how about we work together on figuring out what things are going to make the most sense for the organization, and we'll work together end to end with a lot of sales partnership in the front end. There are lots of folks that would say, I don't want to take salespeople out of the field. At the same time, what I found is that the most successful tech deployments are the ones where you have people who have real sales experience contributing significantly to those conversations. So I think that's part of how you do it. You build an inclusive culture that requires this partnership to be critical for everything.
It's actually really interesting. We've been working with a client and doing discovery calls, trying to figure out the sales process, mapping it through the technology. And it's a common thing we do, but apparently not as common as we thought, because the SDRs and the AEs and enterprise teams are like, this feels like therapy. I love talking to you guys.
Yeah.
Because they apparently don't get a chance to walk through their day in the
They
life
don't. Yeah,
and
they
their
don't.
experience with the technology and the information that they're trying to gather so that they can be effective. And just something about creating the environment for them to be able to just share their thoughts and be a part of it. This feels like
Builds that
therapy. I
relationship there.
love
Yeah,
this.
it's true. It's so true. Yeah. And it's amazing what you learn, right? I was at a dinner the other night, and it doesn't seem like anybody likes their CPQ tool, regardless of whose vendor it is. But I was
We've never
talking with
seen that. Never seen
never.
that.
I was talking with some of our sales team members last year about our tool. And one of the things that they have to do is that a lot of times, even though it produces a quote, it's, I don't know, however we designed it before I got here is either so arcane or complex that they actually have to create individual videos that they then send to their customers on how to read our quote. And if you have to send a video on how to read a quote, you've already lost the plot. So the point is like, so
If
if
your
you're not
quote comes
getting,
with an instruction manual,
right, like
oh
that's
my
not good.
goodness.
That's not good. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you didn't hear that from sales, if you weren't in constant conversation with them, hadn't had them be part of the build, you, not only are you not making it more productive for them, you're doing the opposite. You're making it worse.
That's
It was the first time I'd ever heard that. And I've seen some of the videos and you're like, I get it, because it was a little confusing. Now I could see how a lot of companies, Flock is a good one. Over the course of its last 7 or 8 years, it's transitioned from more of a hardware company to a hardware as a service to a SaaS company. And if your models don't follow along with that, then you can have outdated tech stacks that don't flow. But still, at some point, that should be a top priority for you to do, is fix the way your quotes are sent out so that customers can interpret them and buy from you as easily as possible. It's like the vending machine where you're trying to put $1 in and it won't take it, right? You're just frustrated because you just want the soda, but you can't get it.
My God. Or it takes it and never dispenses the soda. So
Yeah, it never actually comes out. You walk away upset.
Yeah. How long does it take for someone to actually watch the video to look at the quote compared
Yeah,
to your competitor? And
they just walk away. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
we have seen a lot of CPQ complexities, but I think your is the best. I have to watch a video to understand the code.
I want to see it. I want to see it now.
I'm not
all
sure I want to be the
curious.
best. This is not one where I want to win. I get it, but yeah,
No, but
we'll
this
fix it.
actually goes into, I think, what we spoke a lot about in terms of AI, right? And I want to dedicate some good time towards it because you have a lot of experience.
Sure.
I think I want to start with the first very thing which I want you to talk about is the article that you wrote, which really said AI is eating its own customers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And what you meant by that is not warning against AI, but you were saying that the customer is shrinking, right? What you are depending on. We ourselves are also experience exactly the same thing. So
Sure.
talk to us about that article first, and then I think we can get more deep.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I've been out of college for almost 30 years, and I think it is 30 years this month. And I'm still fascinated by economics, even though I haven't been working in the field actively. And to me, it's always a fascinating thing around the economy. At the heart of it is demand and scarcity, and that whole interrelationship. The AI business, regardless of whether you're nervous about it or not, the promises are that it can radically make lives easier for lots of people, whether it removes jobs or creates new jobs or what have you over time. I'll leave that for smarter people. But the promise of making it easier for companies to do the work that they're doing today, if you don't find a way to replace the work, then what you'll do, and this is positive from a capitalist perspective, is shrink the workforce, right? But the knock on, the next downstream effect is that if your workforce is shrinking and there's fewer people who are actually able to be consumers, those consumers can't buy the products that you're trying to sell that you wanted the AI to be built around. So if you use a consumer company as an example, if you have smartphones that are $2,000 a piece and you want to sell more smartphones, and those smartphones make it easier for people to not have jobs because you can have AI do the jobs, fewer people can actually afford smartphones. And so then it's how the company that created the AI tool that made it easier to produce smartphones has now just hurt themselves in the long run. So there's a need for some sort of backstop in the economy. And unfortunately, the interesting thing in this world is we're behind a little bit on safeguards and backstops. Like we're not particularly good at creating these social networks, and things like that would help us back up the transition as we move from one technology to another. On the same side, if you use it as an analog, so because I'm out 30 years, when I first got into the workforce, the internet was still coming to life, right? We had it in college, but it was clunky and no one really used it. And it wasn't until probably 5 to 7 years I got into work where it became a bit more ubiquitous, where people started having email addresses and things like that. But the promise of the internet was very similar. The internet was going to change the world for the better. You could argue that it did some of both, right? I think if you step back and reflect, there are whole industries that did not exist as a result of the internet. And so it did a bunch of new things. It brought people together, at least for a moment, with social media. But then on the flip side, it also had a bunch of negative consequences, right? There were jobs that were moved offshore, there were jobs that were changed. Social media became a bit more destructive. So there's pros and cons. It was an existential threat, is my point, just like the AI thing is. But the more interesting thing for me was what was the economic impact? Because I think you could argue that 10, 15 years removed from the advent of the internet, it's done more good for the world than bad, even though there are obviously places where it wasn't particularly great. I think AI will probably follow the same pattern. The economic component is what fascinates me. Is like with the internet, we didn't have this wholesale replacement of jobs simultaneously. We had a slow, gradual change. And so now you're facing this at light speed as opposed to facing it over 5 years.
Yeah, but see, what I'm seeing personally is that it's going through a maturity cycle, right? There was a
Yeah.
big AI hype, oh, I can do this, I can do that. Even Salesforce type of company said, I'm firing 4,000 people. And then they realize, no, oh, it's not, it's just first generation, it's not as matured as it is. And to be honest, I think to use AI, you require a very high cognitive intelligence, right?
Sure.
Get things out. done. So first, I think humanity will actually progress in that front. Every technology has actually lifted us, right? So AI is also going to lift us, and what we can do, means our brains can do, I doubt AI could ever replace, right? Because we'll keep going up with our cognitive capability, right? But second very important aspect, coming back to our topic really, is that in this world of AI, maturing AI, we should call it, how do you see building a good revenue stack? Where should people start? What are the areas they should do, not do? Just tell us your insights.
Yeah, I think there are things that we can do. So this will tie some of the conversations together from a moment ago. If you think about the purpose of what our goal should be in RevOps is to create a more productive sales organization that doesn't have to type things in all the time, right? That extra work that you do is not really value add. It helps us measure the business, but it doesn't help you win necessarily. The technology is at a point where the things that you're doing in the course of selling, the workflows that you're flowing all the way from like pipe creation through to closure, a lot of those elements can be done in a more hands-off or automated way. And you can extract information from that stream to feed the thirst for information that people have with the way that we measure the business. So the way I think about what AI can do, at least short term, is a lot of teams are using conversational intelligence, or they're using note taker apps like Granola, or even the ones that are built into any of the platforms like Zoom or what have you. The richness of the conversation that's provided in those transcripts shouldn't have to get retyped, right? You should be able to just have that feed a CRM system, and then the CRM system with the right amount of AI should be able to make inferences from a number of different data points on like how healthy do we think that this particular deal is. A good example would be going back to the beginning of this call, the forecast, the traditional forecast is somebody right now saying, I think this is going to be now or then or whatever based off of what I know, but you have more data through the life cycle of the sales process now that is available and can be extracted automatically. That makes all of that easier. So part of where I'm going with this is I feel like as people think through tech stacks, there's a lot of fragmented tools today that need to get tighter, need to get closer together. And if they're not going to do it individually because it's not in the company's best interest to build partnerships or links or whatever, I think the layer of intelligence that we can use right now is to glue these things together and create that seamless experience and then extract that data from it. A great example of that would be, and we don't have like a third party tool out there. We have a home built technology that is used for what I'll call usage statistics and telemetry of how people are using our actual product. Information wouldn't naturally have a connector into Salesforce, but you could, through AI, find a way to glue that information together and say, okay, we have a customer who's very healthfully using the product line and they seem to be exploring these features. We think this might be a set for us to consider selling them something new. And here's how that conversation went and whether we believe it's a healthy piece of business for us. So I think that's a big part of it. The interesting thing, though, is this AI economy of tokens is going to be another component that we talked about revenue management. One of the things that people focus a lot on is the top line, but there's a bottom line component to this too, where to go acquire a company, I think generically people know if you're going to go acquire a customer, it costs more than keeping a customer, right? That's sort of a well-known thing. But in terms of expanding that customer or selling to that customer, there's this whole concept of it's not just the cost of sale for the individual seller. Now it's the AI tools that are being used behind it and whether those things are costing us more than human capital or what would normally take. So you have to think through about not just can I use AI to help go get more customers, but then at what cost, right? Is it costing us more? Is it still profitable business if we use AI in all of these terms? Or should I only use them in certain use cases? I think there's enough profitability in the business, and the others are either things that we should exit or should figure out a lower cost of way of serving.
Yeah, we run across that all the time. You're hearing it, you're seeing the posts on LinkedIn. Oh, our bill,
They
doing
run out
this,
of
like
run out of
everything's
tokens.
yeah. And we've had clients that got delightful surprises at the end of the month when everybody was adopting it. Adoption was actually financially
problem.
untenable. Let's put it that
Right.
way. I want to make sure that we get to this because you had the opportunity to be able to and the pleasure to manage the integration between EMC and Dell, which is one of the largest, as you said, was one of the largest technical integrations. In light of that conversation around how AI is starting to kind of climb into every area of the tech stack, can you give us a quick background on what you went through that type of integration? Like, how did that fit? And then just kind of bring it around to what it taught you in the way that we're handling this new technical evolution.
Yeah. So, primer for anybody that hasn't been involved in a merger or acquisition, the reason you do them ideally is because the sum of the parts adds up to more than what you can have them do individually. The concept that we had gone headfirst into, like from the early days of the acquisition, was the concept that yes, there's a cost synergy that can come from integrating companies and reducing overlap and overhead and tech stacks and all those other things. But the bigger value was in the revenue synergy that could come as a result of bringing the two businesses together. The way to think about that in the high tech space, you have a lot of the same consumers in the sense that you have a CIO who cares simultaneously about client end user client use cases, like people using laptops and Mac and stuff to do their work, and things that they're doing in the background, building applications that they can help monetize or even G&A applications that can help you run your business. That CIO is a key decision maker for all technology acquisitions in a business. And so they were strong Dell shops, but not strong EMC shops, and vice versa, strong EMC shops, but not strong Dell shops. Or the ultimate economic buyer within the businesses were different, and we had been talking to two different people, and by gluing them together, we could get more out of that account by selling together than we could separately. When I think about that framework, when one of the things that we were trying to, when you acquire a company, when you go through that merger, you don't want to churn salespeople, right? You want to make sure that the people who have those relationships stay as long as they possibly can, that you keep them happy throughout that process, and you encourage that collaboration between the sales teams. A good example is being able to find your counterpart is normally really hard, particularly in a company of these sizes, right? We merged these companies at a time, I think they were combined somewhere around 80 or 90,000 employees. In the sales organizations themselves were combined probably 15,000 people. When you're trying to find your peers that sell to that other company, it's not so easy, right? Org charts are barely online. Nobody keeps the who covers what lists anywhere public, right? Because that's like really important, critical information that you would keep private. So finding a way to just have people meet each other and be able to start working together was actually a real project. I think about that today, you could use Glean or you could use a lot of different search engines to pull this information forward and just, hey, who's my counterpart on the Wells Fargo account? And it will tell you all the people that have sold to them recently that have been there in the last 5 years. Where's the latest, if it's public, like where's the latest account plan, all that stuff that you then have to, otherwise you'd have to go and try and find and just burn a lot of cycles for. So that's an example where like I think AI would have been a hugely helpful thing. The other thing is I was more involved in the sales process than the end-to-end integration, but there are places like technology stack overlap where you wind up with a lot of, if I go back to 2015, we had a lot of people that had opinions about what was better, but you didn't have a lot of data that was unbiased. You had more opinions than anything else. And so if you were choosing your tech stack or trying to figure out which one was more easily integrated, you didn't have unbiased information to go off of that. You had people who were in some ways like motivated to keep their products because it helped potentially keep their jobs, and other you wind up with all sorts of weird things that democratizes access to that information. Now, the hard part about all of this, kind of bringing it to present, is that these tools are great, but they rely on your infrastructure and your data being clean and usable. And I don't know too many companies that have perfect data at all. They're usually highly disaggregated. If you're in a smaller company, there's 3 or 4 versions of the data that have started up over the last 5 years, and you're trying to figure out where the most accurate thing is. It sits on somebody's Google Drive as opposed to it being a part of an integrated customer master or what have you.
Sure.
But being able to scan across all of that stuff and then try and figure out what is or isn't would be super helpful. The hard part, I think, is aside from data, is knowing what you get back. Is that real or is it a hallucination, right? Because the AI tool wants to give you an answer regardless of whether it's right or not.
Yeah, deterministic data has become a very important phrase with our clients. I need the same report every time I ask. Otherwise, it's just a forecast, which no one believes, right?
Correct.
And I think there's so much here in your experience as you and I were, and I'm sure Jay was, we were learning how to use the internet in college. I had
Yeah.
an intranet when I got my first job. I could email people in the company, but no one
Very cool.
outside.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then the training you had to go through just to send an email, what not to send, all that jazz. But understanding that at the end of the day, it's people using systems and how you're
True.
leading them so that they can feel comfortable and effective at their jobs.
True.
Really, at the end of the day, what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think there's an element there where AI can help you gain faster visibility to
Sure.
that thing or understand where your gaps are, right?
100%.
If you can find out, okay, my salespeople are going 9 places to solve a problem. There you go. Let's solve that problem. That's
Yeah, you can do discovery a lot faster for sure.
yeah.
What I was going to say is what we are seeing with our customers and might relate to you one is that everybody has, most of them have adopted Gen AI, right? They have enterprise licenses with Claude or OpenAI or something, and they're opening up and giving up to people. But what is happening is the clear determination between what output you require as a deterministic output. Like CPQ, I require deterministic output. I want the same quote every time, right?
Mhm.
Says what probabilistic is acceptable, like drafting an email, summarizing things,
Sure.
responding is fine. And
Sure.
that is what people are started learning now. Because
Yeah.
what, to come back to your CPQ example, right? Today it is honestly very much possible, and we are actually having a very active conversation with one of the companies where they are saying, oh, why can't we use, their CFO is saying, why can't you use Claude to run this CPQ workflow, right? And there are two problems, right? Yes, you can. You can, means that whole debate was, can you really put Claude on Amazon? Yes, you can
Sure.
do it. With Bedrock, you can do it, right? But there are two problems to it. One, will the output be deterministic every time? And which is more important. And second, every time you are interacting with a quote, you are spending tokens. In a coded deterministic application, you will not have to do that.
That was caution.
Because it's going to look at your pricing, it's going to look at your product configuration, and it's going to generate the code based on that. It doesn't need Claude every time, right? Or a
Right.
LLM every time. And that is where I believe people are really learning. So, a direct question to you, and you can choose not to answer, but is that if you see a CPQ application which is completely rebuilt as AI native application, right? Nothing to do with Salesforce or Zora or any of these platforms, right? In your revenue stack, would you consider that?
An AI native
AI native CPQ
solutions?
application built for exactly you. It's not a SaaS product configured for you.
Yeah, I think it's a big question mark,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
I think there's an economic variable, like how expensive is it going to be to operate? And then
Sure.
there's a question around, will it be deterministic every time or not? Conceptually, if I took cost and quality off the table for a moment, those are two big ones, but if I took that off the table for a moment, the concept of being able to interact with a language model to create a quote for a salesperson is fantastic, right? Like, give me a quote for XYZ that's priced how I priced the last 5 deals, or within my pricing authority, or based off of like how 3 similar customers like mine, and give me 4 options, like a small, medium, large, or an extra large. And then also make it really pretty so I can give it to my customer in a PDF like that. That's a really great productivity enhancer. Today, that's an expensive quote.
Oh, yeah.
And like most things, I'm hoping the cost will come down although these days it seems like everything goes the other way.
It's
But that
going up
that
really. Yeah.
Till
but
it
in
eats itself,
general,
it's eating its own customers, right?
in
Yeah.
general, in general, it's supposed to go the other way.
Yeah.
But if your costs come down over time and you can become more deterministic, then I think that'd be great. Yeah. The SaaS one is an interesting angle too, because no one wants to spend money on administrative staff. So the trade-off with what you're suggesting is that somebody has to go run it. And while that can work for a time, it winds up being like a line item that boards don't like. And so I think it's one of those things where I feel like people go back and forth between capital and OpEx all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Sure.
So at this moment in time, I don't know where it stands, but that would be
So we
the
are
SaaS
seeing,
version of that would be interesting.
correct. It's a very evolving approach that is happening in the market now.
Sure.
Because see, we learned everybody can build, but then we learned, oh, I can build, but maintaining it, deploying it to production, and doing iterations, and oh my
That's the hard
God,
part.
is all. I'm taking over SaaS myself,
Yeah.
recreating SaaS. But
Yeah.
then the new approach that is coming is it's removing that complexity. So it's building it autonomously, deploying it to your cloud, maintaining it for you, right? So complexity is gone, and what you got as a CPQ application built is for you. It is not a
That'd be cool.
general SaaS configured for you. And that is, I think, is what is picking up. And I see, as I said, I see that balance between when to use probabilistic, when to use deterministic, and what should be that balance. People will slowly learn that. I'll tell you an example, and you will laugh at it. But when first time the lanes were marked on the roads in India, especially, right? Nobody was following them. 3-lane road, there were 6 lanes people standing, right?
That's funny.
Because it takes generations to
Yeah.
get into a lane discipline, right? In
Right.
US, if you see that if you just go out of a lane on a shoulder or somewhere, or everybody will start looking at you, okay, what the heck this guy is doing?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? Which is very common if you go to India. It's very common.
That's funny.
Everybody
That's
does that, right? So that is, I think, how people will slowly learn of how this AI really works and what should be that balance. And
That's self-correcting. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Interesting.
I'm excited that at some point AI will be able to create a video for your salesperson as your salesperson explaining the quote you get to say.
don't go there.
There's a good use case for you. Yeah, no, let's not do
Let's
that.
hope it's used for other things first before that. But yes, that is possible. Yes.
This has been an awesome conversation. Evan, is there anything else you'd like to share with other RevOps leaders?
I would say the one through line is whether you're looking at new technology, investing in technology, using existing technology, whatever it is, right? The hard part throughout all of it is having the tenacity to do the work, having the discipline to manage the business and not get so hung up and psyched about the technology that you're not actually focusing on the discipline of managing the business. And when I think about that, is like it goes all the way from forecast and management and launching new plays and exploring new customer ICPs or what have you. There's all sorts of neat things you can do with technology, but if you're not disciplined in the way that you're thinking about using it, you're not having the tenacity to do it with process and discipline, then it's not going to matter. And so that's the one key takeaway I'd say from 30 years of experience is figuring out what's important, sticking to it, and driving that stuff forward will never go wrong.
Excellent. Thank you, Evan. I really appreciate that you came on and shared your wisdom with us. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning into our Revenue Architect podcast. Please like and subscribe us on your preference channel in YouTube, Spotify, any of those, and connect to us on LinkedIn and share it. I'd love for others to find out how revenue is evolving and managing, and revenue management is changing in line with the way AI is changing the environment. So we look forward to keeping you front and center on what's happening with these wonderful guests. So until the next episode, we'll see you later.